Julian never thought he would see Leo again. Not in this life. Not as a solid, breathing man instead of a phantom conjured by whiskey and grief. The man who was once the syndicate's most feared operator was now in a sun-drenched yard, splitting firewood. He wore a simple flannel shirt and worn denim, his dark hair tied back with a leather cord. The rugged grace was still there, but the lethal edge was gone. As Julian approached, Leo's head snapped up, his eyes instantly devoid of recognition, filled only with a stranger's wariness. Julian's voice was a tremor when he called his name. Leo. The man's brow furrowed, and he asked who Leo was. A torrent of unspoken words clogged Julian's throat. He could only stare, his gaze a physical touch, tracing the lines of a face he had memorized through 5 years of aching absence. This man had been his savior, pulling him from a living hell where he was nothing more than a test subject for a rogue chemist. Leo had trained him, protected him, and they had become partners in a world painted in shades of blood and shadow. In the small, Spartan apartment they once shared, they had found solace in each other's arms, a desperate, fierce intimacy that defied their violent profession. And, in the end, Leo was supposed to have been the man Julian killed. 5 years ago, Leo had been caught in a political crossfire, a loose end the higher-ups wanted tied permanently. To shield Julian from the fallout, Leo had orchestrated his own death, insisting Julian be the one to pull the trigger. Julian remembered holding him, feeling the warmth drain from his body, his own heart turning to ice in his chest. Now, seeing him here, alive and whole, felt like a cruel miracle. Julian surged forward, his fingers closing around Leo's wrist. Leo's reaction was instantaneous and sharp, a violent tug to break the hold. Julian clung on, a desperate anchor, but his heart sank. The pulse beneath his fingers was thready, weak. The formidable power that had once coursed through Leo was gone, replaced by the frail rhythm of an ordinary man. He truly remembered nothing. A woman's voice called out a name Julian didn't recognize. Instantly, Leo wrenched his arm free. Julian looked up to see the outline of a woman in a bright summer dress behind a screen door. She asked if they had a visitor, calling Leo by that unfamiliar name. Leo told her to stay inside with Lily, to not come out. It was only then that Julian noticed 2 small hands gripping the edge of the doorframe. The world tilted, a wave of dizziness washing over him. Leo turned back, his posture defensive, as if Julian were an intruder threatening his newfound peace. He demanded to know what Julian wanted. Before Julian could answer, a small, clear voice from inside cried out for her daddy. He saw the tension in Leo's shoulders ease, the hard line of his jaw soften into something akin to a smile. Leo, the man who had once bled for him, was now a husband and a father. The man who had faced down death to protect Julian now stood ready to defend his family from him, the axe held loosely at his side. A metallic taste filled Julian's mouth, and the world went black. When he drifted back to consciousness, it was to the sound of a child's laughter, bright and carefree like the chirping of sparrows. For a disoriented moment, he was back in their old apartment, a place so quiet only birds dared to visit, believing the sight of Leo had been a dream. Then, the door creaked open, followed by the sound of a cloth being wrung out. As a damp washcloth neared his face, his eyes flew open. He was bound hand and foot. The woman, her face a canvas of gentle concern, started for a moment before her composure returned. She explained that he had fainted and had some dirt on his face she wanted to wipe away. Her yellow dress made her look like a wildflower. So it wasn't a dream. It made a bitter sort of sense. Leo had never visited his dreams before. Julian had assumed he'd moved on to another life, But the truth was far simpler and more painful. Leo had just forgotten him completely. She asked if he was an old friend of her husband's, explaining that he had been found 5 years ago at the edge of town with no memory of his past. If Julian could fill in the blanks, she was sure he would be grateful. Julian's first instinct was a possessive, silent scream. "He's not your husband, he's mine." But the raw emotion receded under the woman's soft, unassuming gaze. He had loved Leo, and Leo had loved him back, but their love had never been something they could claim in the light of day. Seeing Leo alive was a gift he never expected. He had no right to dictate the terms of that life. Later, Leo stood leaning against the doorframe, arms crossed, his expression flat. He told his wife, Clara, that he had told her to leave Julian alone. Julian's retort was automatic, a ghost of their old banter. He shot back that if Leo wanted him left alone, he shouldn't have carried him inside. Leo paused, a flicker of something unreadable in his eyes, before letting out a short, humorless laugh. He asked if Julian would have preferred to be left on the doorstep to attract trouble. The excuse would have been more believable if Leo had just tossed him in the woodshed. Leo had always been soft-hearted, a dangerous trait in their line of work. It was that softness that had compelled him to rescue Julian all those years ago, a mission undertaken not for money, but because he couldn't stand to see him suffer. Clara slipped out to play with the little girl, Lily, whose happy giggles echoed in the small house. Leo watched them, a distant, fond look on his face, and in that moment of distraction, he didn't notice Julian had worked his hands free. Julian was on his feet and behind him in a silent flash. Before Leo could react, Julian struck a precise nerve cluster at the base of his neck. The move was one Leo himself had taught him, and using it on its creator felt like a strange, painful irony. Leo froze, his eyes widening in shock and anger as he tried to understand what had just happened. Julian asked him what he was doing. His own question, he realized, was to tell him to stop being so damn compassionate to everyone. He cupped Leo's face in his hands and, ignoring the fury in Leo's eyes, he kissed him. The moment their lips met, Leo's body went rigid. He clenched his jaw and Julian tasted blood. Leo was trembling, fighting against the paralysis with a strength Julian hadn't expected, but his broken body couldn't obey. Julian rested his forehead against Leo's collarbone, listening to the frantic, rabbit-fast beat of his heart. He wrapped his arms around Leo's waist, the first embrace in 5 years, but it did nothing to fill the cavernous void inside him. This was Leo, and yet it wasn't. The man he knew would have kissed him back with a devouring hunger, a raw passion born from the constant presence of death. Their past intimacy had been a firestorm. This was just an echo. Julian pulled back after a moment, telling him the paralysis would wear off in half an hour. He tried for a smile, but it felt brittle. He noticed a dark, wet patch blooming on Leo's shirt where his face had been. He hadn't been able to stop a few tears from escaping. Leo's expression was thunderous, his gaze finally fixing on Julian's face with a strange, searching intensity before he looked away. He struggled to form a sentence, asking why Julian would do this when they were strangers. Julian changed the subject, his voice strained. He complimented Clara, saying she was beautiful. Leo's jaw tightened, and he glared, his voice a low growl. He warned Julian that if he dared to touch them, he would never forgive him. The protective fury, once reserved for Julian, was now a shield for another family. The acidic sting of it was almost unbearable. Julian's smile felt like a mask cracking apart. He just wanted to run. He assured Leo it was just an observation, a compliment, but Leo's suspicion didn't waver for a second. He told Leo to pretend he had never come, that none of this had ever happened. A frown creased Leo's brow. He asked where Julian was going. Julian scoffed, asking if Leo wanted him to stay. Leo said nothing. He was handsome even when he was angry. The urge to simply take him, to drag him back to their old life and force him to remember, was a physical ache. But the memory of Lily's voice calling for her daddy was a shard of glass in his heart. He couldn't do it. With a final, flippant remark about their old times being settled, he turned and walked out the door, not looking back. He didn't go far. He found a perch in a tall pine tree overlooking the small property and waited. Half an hour later, Leo emerged, moving stiffly. Clara came out with Lily in her arms, and the three of them stood talking in the yard. Julian couldn't hear the words, but he saw Leo reach out and stroke Lily's hair. His whole posture relaxed and open. They were a perfect picture of domestic bliss, a world he could never enter. He stayed in the tree as the sun set and smoke began to curl from the chimney. He watched Leo put away the axe, wash his hands with a towel Clara handed him, and sit down to dinner with his family. He watched as a lamp was lit, their shadows dancing on the window panes, until finally, the light went out. He had witnessed a full day in the life Leo had always wanted, a life of peace. He had gotten his wish. Julian climbed down, thinking of going to the window for one last look, but stopped. He couldn't bear to see Leo sharing a bed with someone else. He stood outside in the cold for most of the night, and just before dawn, an idea took hold. He needed to see their old place. The small cabin he found after a long drive was a ruin. The door hung from a single hinge, the yard was choked with weeds, and the roof had partially collapsed. Only the old pear tree in the front yard was thriving, its blossoms falling like snow in the breeze. He went to the woods behind the cabin, to the place where he'd made a small memorial for Leo. Since the syndicate had taken the body, all he'd had were clothes to bury. A simple, unmarked wooden plank had served as a headstone, now covered in moss. He sat against it, drank a bottle of bourbon, and eventually fell asleep, clinging to the wood. The Leo who belonged to Clara and Lily was alive and well. The Leo buried here was his. He told himself to stay away, but when he heard rumors of a gang of drifters moving south, terrorizing small towns and heading straight for Leo's, he couldn't stop himself. Leo was defenseless now. Julian was a protector, it's what he did. He donned a wide-brimmed hat and a scarf to cover the lower half of his face and rode hard. He arrived to find the gang harassing Clara. She stood her ground, clutching a baseball bat and shielding Lily behind her. One of the men, grimy and leering, was twirling a lock of her hair around his finger. For a split second, a dark, ugly thought flashed through Julian's mind. If they were gone, then he and Leo. The thought was gone as quickly as it came, leaving a residue of self-loathing. He was already moving, vaulting the fence and grabbing a handful of dried apples from a basket. He flung them with deadly accuracy, and the yard filled with grunts of pain. The leader of the gang fixed him with a malevolent stare, his hand moving inside his jacket, outlining the shape of a knife. He warned Julian to walk away. Julian knew he could handle them, but with Clara and Lily there, it was too risky. As the leader's hand twitched, Julian snatched the bat from Clara, shoved her and Lily back into the house, and slammed the door. He was just in time to deflect two thrown knives that would have embedded themselves in the wood. He taunted them, and to his surprise, they laughed, their confidence unshaken. He advanced on them, and then he felt a dull, piercing pain in his back right shoulder. He glanced over and understood their arrogance. They had thrown 3 knives. 2 were a distraction aimed at the door. The third, meant for him, had found its mark. It was buried deep in the muscle. When he pulled it out, blood flowed freely, dark and viscous. The blade was coated with something he recognized instantly. A neurotoxin designed to feel like your bones were melting and your heart was on fire. There was no antidote. The men howled with laughter. One sneered that he should have stayed out of it, and told the others to move him aside so he could watch them have fun with the pretty lady before he died. From inside, Clara cried out his name in alarm. He yelled for her to stay put, then turned to the gang, a slow, cold smile spreading across his face. The laughter died. As they stared in disbelief, he slowly, deliberately, licked the poison from the blade. He savored their shock before speaking. He told them it was nothing special. Raised as a chemist's guinea pig, he had been dosed with so many toxins over the years that he was practically immune. He then asked them what they were saying earlier, hefting the baseball bat. He thought they wanted him to show them some attention. Dealing with 7 men, even inept ones, was exhausting. He dragged them far from the house, disarmed them of their toxins, and ensured they wouldn't be bothering any more women, ever again. By the time he was done, the sun was setting. He wanted to see Leo, but knew he would be comforting his terrified family. Julian didn't want to intrude. He found a motel and collapsed onto the bed. He was woken sometime later by a knock on the door. He sat up with a gasp of pain. The toxin might not have killed him, but the knife wound was very real. The knock came again, more insistent. He had told the front desk not to be disturbed. Annoyed, he opened the door, his irritation dying on his lips. It was Leo. Leo looked just as surprised to see him. He was holding a grocery bag with a rotisserie chicken, some pastries, and 2 bottles of whiskey. Julian realized he was there to thank the mysterious stranger who had saved his family. In this small town, a person dressed like Julian was easy to track down. Leo's voice was stiff when he confirmed it was him. Julian asked what time it was. Leo replied that it was around 8. Julian had only been asleep for an hour. He stepped aside to let him in, but Leo hesitated, clearly conflicted now that his family's savior was also his tormentor. Julian, taking pity on his indecision, told him to take the gifts back, that he didn't deserve them. It wasn't false modesty. He truly felt he didn't. That fleeting, monstrous thought about Clara and Lily had tainted his actions. But Leo came in anyway, setting the items on the small table. He asked for the stranger's name. Julian looked at him for a long moment before answering. "Reed." Leo repeated the name softly, then formally thanked him for what he had done. Julian dismissed it with a wave of his hand. The room fell silent, the air thick with unspoken things and the growing scent of blood from Julian's shoulder. Leo noticed. He pointed out the injury. Julian desperately searched Leo's face for any sign of personal concern, but found none. It was just the reflexive kindness of a good man. Julian insisted it was nothing, just a part of the job. He tried to cut the encounter short, telling Leo he should get back to his family. Leo gave him another long, searching look, and for the first time in 5 years, Julian couldn't read his expression at all. He used to know Leo's every thought from a single glance. Leo agreed to leave and said perhaps they would meet again someday. Julian replied that he was checking out in the morning. It was best if their paths didn't cross again. His plan had only been to check on him, to ensure his safety from the shadows. Any more interaction would only cause them both more pain. But as Leo turned to leave, Julian's body betrayed him, taking a tiny, involuntary step forward. He caught himself, clenching his fists until his knuckles were white. After Leo was gone, the smell of blood was suffocating. Julian opened the window and tore off a piece of the chicken. It was bland, nothing like the one from the deli near their old place that Leo used to bring home after a mission. Leo would always say they'd split it, but Julian would end up eating most of it. Leo never minded. He always found other ways to get his due. Julian drew a hot bath, sinking into the scalding water and letting it sting the wound. He submerged himself completely, the warmth a comforting weight, almost like being in Leo's arms. He thought he heard knocking again, a distant rhythmic thud that seemed to come and go with the ripples in the water. Then suddenly the surface of the water shattered. He gasped as a strong arm wrapped around his waist and hauled him out. He was back in the cold air of the room, dripping on the floor, staring at Leo, who had returned. One of Leo's arms was clamped around him. The other held a small box of medical supplies. Julian coughed up some water and started to laugh, a bitter, broken sound. He asked Leo if he had ever told him to stop being so damn compassionate. Leo's eyebrow arched. He asked if Julian was in any condition to try and kiss him again. With a grunt of effort, he lifted Julian from the tub and deposited him on the bed, quickly wrapping him in the covers. The brief contact of Leo's solid, warm body was branded onto his skin. He heard a jar open, but then there was a long pause. He turned to see Leo touching a spot on his other shoulder, his thumb rough and warm against Julian's skin. He asked what it was. The touch sent a shiver through him, and he instinctively pulled away. It was a mark from one of their nights together. Leo withdrew his hand, his face unreadable. Then, the cool salve was being applied to the knife wound, the pressure surprisingly firm. Julian winced. Leo had never been gentle with him, not in that way. He wondered if Leo was gentle with Clara. The thought was a petty sting, but he couldn't help it. The scar Leo had touched was from their last night together. To preserve the memory, Julian had later carved the shape of Leo's bite mark into his own skin, a permanent, flower-like scar. He often traced it on sleepless nights, pretending it was Leo's kiss. After dressing the wound, Leo told him to keep it dry. Julian slowly, deliberately, put on his clothes, his back to Leo. When he finally turned, Leo was still there, sitting at the table, nursing a glass of whiskey. He seemed to be lost in thought. Julian repeated that he should go home. Leo set down his glass and looked at him. He said that Clara and Lily were with her father for the night. Then he asked Julian to tell him about Leo. There was a subtle but crucial distinction in his phrasing. He asked about Leo, not about his past. It was as if he couldn't connect the name to himself. Whatever Julian said would be a story about a stranger. Julian sat down across from him and poured a drink. He said that Leo was a good man, one of the best, skilled and kind-hearted. He paused, the rest of the words dying in his throat. He couldn't bring himself to talk about their shared past to this new version of Leo. So he lied. He told him Leo had 2 sisters, both married to good men, living happy lives. Leo cut him off. He asked what Julian was to him. What was this old time between them? Julian looked down into his glass, the amber liquid blurring. He took a large swallow, the burn stinging his eyes. He said they were partners, they had each other's backs. In their line of work, he explained, life was short and uncertain. They were both young, unattached. What they had was just a way to cope with the pressure. Leo's eyes were fixed on him, his gaze sharp and penetrating. He asked if that was all it was. Julian met his gaze and forced himself to say that was all. The next morning, Julian was up early, determined to leave before he could do any more damage. But as he was leaving the motel, a familiar voice called out to him. A young man, taller and broader than he remembered, with the same cheerful, open face, rushed towards him. It was Ethan, the son of a wealthy businessman Julian had rescued from kidnappers 2 years prior. The boy had been infatuated with the life of a wanderer and had begged to follow him. Ethan explained that he'd heard about the Drifter gang and had come to help, arriving just after the trouble was over. He threw his arms around Julian in a boisterous hug, exclaiming that he couldn't believe the hero of the town was Julian himself. Julian patted his back, a genuine smile touching his lips for the first time in days. Ethan's uncomplicated earnestness was a bomb. But when Ethan pulled back, his face suddenly contorted in pain and he cried out. Leo was standing there, his face a grim mask, his hand clamped around Ethan's wrist, forcing him to release Julian. Leo said nothing, simply taking a seat at a nearby table as if he belonged there. Julian stared, bewildered. He thought they had said their goodbyes. Ethan, rubbing his wrist, complained about Leo's rudeness, but was quickly distracted, pestering Julian for the story of the fight. Julian felt strangely self-conscious, recounting the events with Leo sitting right there, like he was trying to impress him. He kept it brief, but Ethan was insatiable. The boy then grabbed Julian's arm, his eyes shining, and invited him to come stay at his family's estate. He promised they would train together, and his mother would make her famous apple pie. It was hard to refuse such genuine warmth. As Julian agreed, Leo slammed his glass down on the table. Both of them looked at him. His expression hadn't changed, but his eyes were dark. He pointed out that Julian was injured and in no condition to travel. Ethan, ever dramatic, gasped and started fussing over Julian, pulling out expensive-looking salves from his ridiculously overstuffed pack. He insisted Julian stay with him in the finest suite in the motel until he was healed. As Ethan went to his room to rest, Leo blocked Julian's path. He said that Clara wanted to thank him in person. The words were like a needle to the heart. Of course, every visit, every kindness, it was all on Clara's behalf. He was just the man who had saved Leo's wife. Julian tried to refuse, saying the gifts were enough, but Leo was immovable. They walked in silence, not towards Leo's home, but down a deserted country road. Julian finally asked where they were going. Leo didn't answer until they reached a massive, ancient oak tree. He stopped beneath its sprawling branches and turned to face Julian. He said this was where he was found 5 years ago. Julian could guess what had happened. The syndicate's leader had spared Leo, but had taken his skills and his memory, giving him a chance at a normal life. Julian met Leo's gaze. It was heavy, intense. Leo spoke his name, his real name, a name he hadn't heard in 5 years. The sound was a physical shock, rooting him to the spot. Leo told him that even his name was a lie and asked how much of his story was true. When Leo used to say his name, it was a soft caress, a lover's murmur. Hearing it now, flat and devoid of emotion, was terrifying. He was afraid of what would happen if he heard it spoken with affection again. He might break, tell him everything, and shatter the peaceful life Leo had built. He looked at the ground, insisting that everything he said was true. Leo stepped closer, grabbing Julian's collar. He took Julian's hand and guided it to his own back, tracing a line up his spine. The gesture was horribly familiar. He told Julian there was a scar there, a knife wound. The doctor said 1 inch to the side, and he would have been dead. He leaned in, his breath warm against Julian's cheek, and said that he had a feeling Julian knew all about it. Of course he knew. He was the one who put it there. Leo had guided his hand then, too, forcing him to drive the blade home to make it look real, to buy Julian his freedom. This man, who remembered nothing, was now hunting for the one who had destroyed his life, and he had found him. A broken smile fought its way onto Julian's face. He confessed that he was the one who stabbed him. Beneath the dappled sunlight of the old oak, he waited for the verdict. This was a good place to die, to finally give Leo back the life he had saved. But instead of violence, he heard a low, humorless laugh. Leo released him, his tone dripping with sarcasm. He said Julian was lying again. Julian insisted it was the truth, his voice cracking, the words tumbling out in a torrent of guilt. He told Leo that he had saved him, but at a terrible cost, and that none of it would have happened if they had never met. By the end, he was choking on his own sobs. For 5 years, he had believed he was a curse, a poison that ruined everything he touched. In the midst of his breakdown, Leo's voice cut through the grief, sharp and clear. He asked why Julian was tormenting him. Julian, blinded by tears, could only stammer that he wasn't. Leo's voice was steady, each word a carefully placed stone. He accused Julian of toying with him because he couldn't fight back, of seducing him and then leaving, of feeding him scraps of a past he couldn't grasp and then judging him for it. He spoke of the emptiness he felt when Julian walked away, an inexplicable void he didn't understand. He said that with only 5 years of memories, he felt incomplete, like half of himself was missing, and that half was in Julian's hands. The tears stopped. Julian saw Leo's face clearly then, a mixture of the man he knew and the stranger he had become. He couldn't meet his eyes. Leo pressed on, asking why, if Julian wanted nothing to do with him, he had kissed him in the first place. Julian whispered an apology, saying he had lost control. "Lose it again," Leo said. Before Julian could process the words, Leo's face was suddenly inches from his own, and his mouth was on his. It was a kiss of desperate inquiry, a storm of pent-up confusion and burgeoning memory. It was hungry and fierce, Leo's hand tangling in his hair, holding him fast. When they broke for air, Julian could only whisper his name, a broken, tear-choked sound. Leo's breathing was ragged, his face a storm of lust and bewilderment. He traced a line of kisses down Julian's neck to his collarbone, his fingers fumbling with the buttons of Julian's shirt. Then his breath hitched. His eyes, suddenly red-rimmed, fixed on the flower-shaped scar on Julian's shoulder. His thumb pressed down on it, hard. Julian flinched, and the small movement seemed to enrage him. He bit down on the scar hard enough to draw blood. Julian gasped, clutching at his shirt, the pain sharp and grounding. "Help me remember." Leo rasped against his skin, his voice thick with a desperate plea. "I need to remember. Is it fair that you're the only one who knows? Fair? What about Clara and Lily? Their 5 years of life together were just as real as the decade Julian had shared with him. There was no fairness to be found here." He pushed himself out of Leo's arms and stumbled back. Leo was frozen again, paralyzed by the same nerve strike, his eyes wide with a mixture of betrayal and a new, dawning understanding. He demanded to know if Julian was leaving again. Julian straightened his clothes, hardened his heart, and turned away. Back at the motel, Ethan was waiting. He announced that he had sent for a renowned doctor, an old family friend, to look at Julian's wound. The naive extravagance of it, calling a famous physician for a simple knife wound, having bodyguards on a trip to the wilderness, was a world away from Julian's reality. He tried to persuade Ethan to leave at once, but the boy insisted they wait. Later, Ethan offered him a box of date cakes, saying they were made by the prettiest woman in town. Julian recognized them instantly. They were the same ones Leo had brought him. He declined, the sweetness in his mouth already turning to ash. Ethan then noticed the cut on Julian's lip, crusted with dried blood. A cold dread seeped into Julian. His blood was tainted from his youth. Leo had built up a tolerance over their years together, but now, he rushed out of the room and back to the old oak tree. It was empty. The entire, wrenching encounter felt like a fever dream. The doctor, a sharp, white-haired man named Eris, arrived late that night. He took one look at Julian's nearly healed shoulder, declared him perfectly fine, and tried to throw them both out. Before slamming his door, he tossed Julian a small vial, telling him it would remove the scar on his other shoulder. Julian pocketed it. He would give it to Clara tomorrow. She could use it to remove the scar on Leo's back, the last physical tie between them. Sleep was impossible with Ethan's snoring. Julian went out onto the motel balcony for some air. The cool night was quiet. He couldn't stop thinking about Leo's kiss, about the feeling of his blood heating in his veins. The bite on his shoulder ached, a new memory to hold on to. A voice startled him from his reverie. Dr. Eris was standing there, telling him that while his body was fine, his soul was sick. The doctor, it turned out, knew Julian's father, the chemist who had used him. They had been rivals of a sort. Eris had warned him against his unethical experiments, but the man had been obsessed with saving someone he loved. As the old doctor reminisced, the story felt like it belonged to another person, another lifetime. Then, Eris offered Julian a place with him. He was old, with no heir, and he didn't want his knowledge to die with him. He told Julian to think about it. For the first time in years, Julian felt a flicker of hope. He might have a place to belong again. The next morning, after placating a sulking Ethan with promises of a future visit, Julian waited for Clara to make her daily delivery of cakes. He wanted to give her the vial and then leave with Eris. But she never came. The motel owner mentioned offhandedly that her husband had collapsed the day before after returning from the edge of town and hadn't woken up. The world spun. Eris appeared at his side, holding a vial of potent-smelling salts under his nose. The doctor's face was grave. He said that after Julian left, Leo must have tried to force his way through the paralysis, causing a catastrophic shock to his already damaged nervous system. At Leo's house, Julian saw what he had missed before. The bed had only one pillow. Leo and Clara slept in separate rooms. Clara was in the yard, shelling nuts, Lily sitting quietly beside her. She told Julian, her voice raw with exhaustion, that she knew who he was the moment she saw him. Leo had confessed everything after their first encounter, and then had run out after him, drinking all night when he returned. She said that whatever had happened between them, whoever Leo used to be, he was her family now, and she just wanted him to be okay. Tears streamed down Julian's face. He could only whisper that he was sorry. Eris explained that recovery, if it was even possible, would be a long and delicate process, like reweaving a shredded tapestry thread by thread. Could take years, a decade, or it might never happen. They moved Leo to Eris's remote estate. Julian, after ensuring Ethan had arranged for discreet protection for Clara and Lily, devoted himself to learning from the old doctor. He studied medical texts, learned to identify herbs, and began the painstaking work of mending Leo's shattered nerves. He transplanted a pomegranate tree to the courtyard. The year it first bloomed, Eris passed away peacefully in his sleep. Julian buried him and took on his mantle, accepting students to ensure the doctor's legacy continued, all while spending every spare moment at Leo's side, talking to him, telling him stories of their past. For years past, he returned to their old cabin once to search for a rare herb. The cabin had collapsed into a pile of rotting wood, and the pear tree was dead. He didn't linger. Leo remained unresponsive. The pomegranates on the tree in the courtyard were a constant temptation for the younger students. One afternoon, a small apprentice begged him to pick the highest fruit, convinced it was the ripest. Wary of the boy climbing the tree himself, Julian clambered up the branches. His skills had faded over the quiet years, and the climb was more difficult than he expected. He finally plucked the fruit and turned to toss it down, but he froze. Below him stood a man in a simple white shirt, his long hair unbound. He was pale and thin, but he was standing. And he was smiling. It was Leo. He was looking up at Julian, his lips curved in a gentle, familiar smile, and he held out his hands. Julian was sure he was dreaming, that he had already fallen and this was a final, beautiful hallucination. Then his foot slipped and he was falling for real. He landed in a warm, solid embrace. It didn't hurt at all. Leo's voice was a low murmur against his hair. I had the longest dream. Julian buried his face in Leo's shoulder, tears of disbelief and overwhelming joy finally breaking free. What did you dream about? A soft chuckle vibrated through Leo's chest. I dreamed you ate a whole rotisserie chicken and didn't even save me the bones. Julian laughed through his tears. What else? I dreamed you ate a whole bag of candied walnuts and complained about a stomach ache. And what else? Julian asked, pulling back to look at him. Leo's expression was soft, his eyes shining with a love that spanned a decade of violence and 5 years of silence. He didn't answer. Instead, as his young students stared in open-mouthed wonder, he leaned in and gently kissed the corner of Julian's mouth. I don't want to dream anymore, he whispered. I just want you.